welcome back to my channel. So this week's video is something that I get asked about so much, and that is a blue tongue skink care guide. Now, a couple of disclaimers as always. I am by no means an expert. If you are looking into getting a blue tongue skink, please look at other resources. Don't just use this video as your sole care guide for this animal. This care guide is going to be largely based on how I care for my blue tongue skink, because that is what works for me, so keep that in mind as well. It took me so long to make this video because I know that I'm not an expert, and I wanted to make sure that everything that I was doing was working okay for Morty, my blue tongue skink. Also, this care guide is not for all blue tongue skinks. Morty is an Irian Jaya blue tongue skink, and that species of skink requires a higher humidity. So this care guide will work for most Indonesians and Irian Jayas. With blue tongue skinks like the Halmaheron, those require a lot more humidity than what mine requires, which is already more than a northern blue tongue skink, so keep that in mind as well. There are so many species of blue tongue skinks, but we're just going to focus on the Indonesian variety of blue tongue skinks. Before we get started, this video is sponsored by thedubiadude.com, so make sure to stay until the end of this video to find out how you can save 10% off of your order at thedubiadude.com. So if you have your blue tongue skink already and you're trying to figure out how you go about telling what kind of blue tongue skink you have, I will put in the description some links for websites that I use that actually goes through, and there's pictures and everything. I don't want to take those people's pictures, but there's pictures and stuff in that link that will show you, and I'm also going to link a super helpful blue tongue skink forum that a lot of people ask questions on. So if you have specific questions, those are in that forum as well. Those were super helpful tools for me when I first got Morty, so I'm gonna leave that. But just some quick guidelines. Most Indonesians are going to have black front legs. These might be speckled black, they might be solid black, depending on what kind they are. But if your blue tongue skink has black front legs, it probably requires a higher humidity. And if it has like the gray tanny color front legs, then it's probably a northern, and this whole care guide is not going to apply. Other things that you can look for are the thickness of the pattern on their back. Thinner lines on their back often mean Indonesian. Irian Jaya blue tongue skinks will often have a trident on the backs of their neck, and a Halmaheron will have a black belly, where the other ones will have almost salmon colored or white bellies. So again, link in the description for all that if you are trying to figure out what kind of blue tongue skink you have. So first of all, just a little bit of information about them. Blue tongue skinks are going to live for about 15 to 20 years, but they can live much longer than that. And they are going to get about 18 to 22 inches depending on what species you have. So this is a pretty large lizard, and it does have a pretty long lifespan. As far as temperament of these guys, they're super calm. Contrary to their sausage-like bodies, they are not quite as calm as bearded dragons, but they are actually going to move around a little bit. Mine absolutely loves to burrow, and he's always active, and when I take him out, he likes to try to run. Handling them is super easy because they have such a good temperament. The thing with them though is they are a very heavy-bodied lizard, and their balance is terrible. They have that super thick body and short little legs, so if you are holding them, you have to make sure to support their entire body and make sure that they're not going to fall, because a fall for them could easily be fatal. So handling them, they are wonderful to handle. Just make sure that you are careful. Housing these guys. So bare minimum is a 40-gallon breeder. That is where I have started. Mine is not quite an adult yet, but when he is an adult, I will be upgrading his tank to one that is at least 4 foot long. They do not need height, so a Terra large and low is wonderful. Climbing is not great for them. They do risk falling and injuring themselves. But since the blue tongue skinks that we are talking about do require humidity, you can also do vision cages. Anything like that that will hold in humidity is going to be wonderful. Since this is a burrowing animal that also needs a high humidity, I would highly suggest using a loose substrate for them so they can enjoy the same sorts of things that they would in the wild. I use a mixture of orchid bark, eco earth, cypress mulch, and sphagnum moss, and that does a really good job of holding in humidity, and it also gives him a nice soft substrate that he can burrow into. Just like with any other reptile, they also are going to need hides so that they can feel safe and secure. So this could be anything. This could be half logs, this could be plastic plastic hides. PVC pipes work really well because they do have that long, thick body, and PVC pipes, you can cut them in half and make a super long hide. You can partially bury them and they can burrow under them. They make really good hides, and that idea is 100% thanks to Reptile Mountain, but I would suggest having at least 2 hides in there, one on their warm side and one on their cool side, just so that they are able to move around in that tank and still feel secure. And if you are having any kind of issues keeping humidity up, you can always put a moist hide in there as well. You can get just a Tupperware from the dollar store and cut a hole and put moss in there and keep the moss wet. Just a place for them to get moisture if they're lacking it, or shed, or whatever they need to do. You also need enrichment in there. You guys know that I love enrichment. Enrichment is anything that your animal can do to keep their brain active. So my favorite thing to use is going to be fake leaves. You can put lots of fake leaves everywhere in there, and he'll kind of slinky through those leaves, and he moves his plants around non-stop. Him digging is part of his enrichment. Him being able to climb those really short hides is part of his enrichment. Anything that they can do to keep their brains active is going to count as enrichment. You need a large water bowl, something that they can get their body off into if they are shedding. Now, when he was a baby, I would actually only fill up his water bowl a little bit because baby blue-tongued skinks are super clumsy. They flip over in that water bowl, they might not be able to turn themselves back over and get out, and we don't want to risk them drowning. And super important, you cannot house blue-tongued skinks together. Blue-tongued skinks are incredibly territorial and very aggressive towards one another. Even when blue-tongued skinks breed, they actually bite at each other and hold on to each other with their teeth, and they are very aggressive, and a lot of times blue-tongued skinks will get injured during that process. So even when they make babies, they are super aggressive, so keeping them housed together, no matter if they're males and females, no matter what they are, you cannot keep them together. So let's talk about the conditions inside of that tank. So these are a diurnal creature, which means that they are active during the day. So they will need a regular day-night cycle for their light. So I have my lights on for them every morning at 7, and they go off every night at 8. So that is about a 13 hours on in the day. I do use a timer switch for his lights, so that way it just makes it easier, and that way his lights are going on and off at the same time every day. But make sure that they do have a day-night cycle. As far as heating for them, I use a basking bulb. Some people do use heat pads. You can do that as well, but I prefer to use basking bulbs for diurnal creatures because if they were in the wild, they would come out and bask in the sun. Their basking spot needs to be at about 96 to 100 degrees. Morty likes it on the cooler end of that, so just adjust it until your animal is happily basking. As far as a UV light, this one is up to you and how you want to do it. I use UV lighting in my blue-tongued skinks tank because, as I said, they are diurnal, and I do provide all my diurnal animals with UV lighting. Just as they would be exposed to the sun in the wild, I wanted to give them that same sort of opportunity in captivity. But if that is not something you want to do and you instead want to do D3 supplementation, that is a possibility as well, and I will get to that in the feeding section. But make sure that you are providing them vitamin D3 in some form because they do need that for bone strength, and we do not want our animals to get metabolic bone disease, so they're going to need D3 somehow. The ambient temperature in that tank needs to stay at about 75 to 80 degrees, and if you are having trouble maintaining that, especially in like the winter time, you could always put a heat pad with a thermostat in there. You could always use a ceramic heat emitter. Make sure it's in a dome with a dimmer switch so it's not blasting heat at them, but if you need a little bit of supplemental heat, especially now as I'm filming this, it is fall and it is 40 something degrees here every morning. For Morty, when he was a baby, I did have a heat pad under his hot side hide as well as a basking bulb because when he was a baby, he was very shy about coming out and basking, and that way it allowed him to feel safe in his house and still get his heat to be able to properly digest his food. So if that is something that you are having a problem with a baby, you can keep that in mind as well. And to measure those temperatures, we are going to use a temperature gun. Using the little dial thermometers are going to be great for the ambient temperature and for the humidity of the tank, but those do not accurately give you the temperature of their actual basking spot itself. So So a temperature gun is going to be the most accurate way that you're going to be able to measure that temperature. For the humidity for a lot of the Indonesian and the Irian Jaya blue-tongued skinks are going to be at about 60 to 65, 70%. They do like humidity as opposed to the northern, so make sure that you are keeping an eye on that humidity, but daily misting, and as long as you have a big water bowl in there, is going to be fine to keep their humidity up. As far as hygiene for that tank, you are going to basically follow the same rules that you do for any other reptiles. You are going to need to spot clean their tanks daily. When they poop, it is super gross, so make sure that you are spot cleaning that daily because we don't want them to sit in there with that. Also, make sure that you are cleaning their water bowl out daily and giving them fresh water. They are a burrowing species, so they're going to get a lot of loose substrate into that water bowl. You are going to be reminded daily, no matter what, that that water bowl needs to be cleaned out. And then about once a month, you are going to want to completely break down that tank and disinfect everything once a month, or whenever the tank starts to smell weird. Make sure you're keeping your animal clean in order to maintain his health and prevent things like parasites. Let's talk about feeding these guys. Feeding blue-tongued skinks is another one of those highly debated topics, as almost everything in keeping reptiles is. There are multiple different ways that you can do this, and almost anyone you talk to does this differently. So let's go over the ways that you can do that, and then I'll tell you what I do. So the first option that you have is going to be a diet that is very similar to a bearded dragon. So it's going to be about 50% proteins. That's going to come from live insects like superworms, crickets, dubia roaches, night crawlers, hornworms, anything like that. About 40% fresh vegetables, so you're going to do your leafy greens, collard greens, mustard greens, turnip greens, dandelion greens, anything like that. And then they can do about 10% of fruits as well, and that makes up that diet. Your other option here is going to be canned cat and dog food. They will start out on cat food when they are under a year old, and then once they are a year old, they are going to switch over to dog food. Now, this isn't going to be just any kind of cat and dog food. They have to be high quality food, so you're going to look for things that don't have fish in them, that are grain free preferably, things that are super high quality, highly rated. And if you're using this method, it is also recommended to sprinkle in another food that is formulated specifically for blue-tongued skinks. These are things such as Reptiles Blue Buffet and Arcadia's Omni Gold. They are formulated specifically for blue-tongued skinks, so they have the supplements in there that they need. They are made with things like snails, which is one of the things that these guys do eat in the wild, so sprinkling that into their diet will help as well. The way I do it is I do a mixture of both of these. So Morty used to eat live bugs, and more recently he has stopped. He won't eat anything that he has to chase. And so what I do is I will do a brand of cat food. So for example, I would do the Halo cat food, and I will chop greens up into that. Usually I use collard greens because that is Zaz's favorite, so I already have it. I'll chop that in and mix it in with the cat food, and I will do that for 1 week. Then the next week I will do Reptiles Blue Buffet, and then I'll do the wellness cat food with greens mixed into it, and then I'll do the Arcadia Omni Gold, and I just keep changing it up. That way I'm making sure that he is getting a mixture and making sure that he is getting the nutrition that he needs. But like I said, everyone does this differently, so definitely make sure to research all the different feeding guides for these guys and make sure that you do what you feel is best for your animal. And then of course, giving them fresh water treated with ReptiSafe every day. If you don't want to use ReptiSafe, you can definitely use something like purified water, but ReptiSafe is super easy. It's like $6 for a bottle this big that's going to last for such a long time, and just putting a couple drops in that water bowl every time you use it, it's going to get rid of the chlorine in the water and also add calcium, so make sure that you are using some kind of dechlorinated water. And as far as feeding frequency, this is going to decrease as your animal gets older. So when they are first born up to about 2 months old, they're going to eat every single day, and you're going to give them a very small amount. With Morty, I gave him like a little baby spoonful, and that was always sufficient for him. Once they get to about 2 months old to about 6 months old, you're going to start feeding them every other day. And I, at that point, started giving him about 2 baby spoonfuls. So then once they're about 6 months old to a year old, you're going to go down to about 2 to 3 times a week to feed them, and they are going to get a little bit more. The rule of thumb is basically about how big their head is about how much food you're going to give them. And then once they're about a year old, you're going to go down to about once or twice a week. Just to elaborate on this a little bit more, feeding in adulthood is going to depend on your animal's weight. So if you notice that your animal is really gaining weight quickly, then you might want to go down to about once or twice a week. And if you notice that they are looking good or they don't weigh as much as they should be, then you can go up to 2 or 3 times a week. So that's going to completely depend on your specific animal. And this is where if you are feeding them cat and dog foods, you're going to switch over to a high quality wet dog food. As far as supplementation, these guys do need vitamins and calcium. So as we talked about before, if you are doing a UV light, you can use calcium without D3, and if you are not doing UV lighting, you can use calcium with D3. I do a very thick dusting of this about once a week in the cat food. The Arcadia Omnigold and the Rapashi already have vitamins mixed in with them, which makes it wonderful. But when I am doing the cat foods, I make sure that I am dusting with both of them. So since he is currently eating about 2 to 3 times a week, I just make sure that one of those times when he has cat food, I put calcium without D3 in there, and that the other day I put vitamins in his cat food. But if you're going to do the UV lights, you just need calcium without D3 and vitamins. And if you don't want the UV lights, you need to make sure you have calcium with D3 and still vitamins. And I did want to talk very quickly about common illnesses that these guys get. So super common for them to have eye infections. First of all, because they are a burrowing species and sometimes things could get stuck in their eye. I like to, especially in the morning when he wakes up and he comes out of his burrow, I like to check his eyes, make sure there's nothing in there. And if there is something in there, I use my pump spray bottle and just kind of lightly mist his eyes. And he used to hate it, and now every morning he lets me spray him in the face, and I just kind of get all that out of his eyes. So make sure to keep an eye on that and make sure that there is nothing getting lodged in their eye that could cause an infection. Another common sickness that they get is respiratory infections. If they are sitting in sopping wet substrate, they could easily get respiratory infections. Blue tongue skinks do sneeze a lot, especially if you're using things like Eco Earth, but sneezing can also be a sign of respiratory infection, and that would usually be accompanied with mucus coming out of their nose or them leaving their mouths open. Parasites are common because a lot of Indonesian blue tongue skinks that you find at places like reptile shows and in some pet stores are going to be wild caught, and wild caught animals almost always have parasites. And if you just got your blue tongue skink, it's always good to be on the safe side and go ahead and take their fecal sample into a vet just to have it tested for parasites, to go ahead and check that when you get them so nothing gets worse. And if you did happen to get an animal that does have parasites and you have to give them medication, really quick tip for giving them that medication. I've never had to give Morty any, but with Zaz and with my crocodile skink that have had parasites, a really easy way to give them medication is actually to take a rag or a hand towel, and you're gonna wrap them up like a burrito with their arms at their sides. Don't squeeze them or anything, but wrapping them up like a burrito and then putting the syringe next to their mouth a lot of times will cause them to relax and to open their mouth so you can squirt it in there. With Zaz, we had to kind of figure that out on our own, and I wish someone would have told me to do that because it's super helpful, so I wanted to throw that in. And the last thing to look for regularly is stuck shed on their toes. So they have these really big, thick bodies and little bitty arms and little bitty toes, and that can cause a lot of issues with shed getting stuck around their toes. So as long as you have a large water bowl and you are keeping the humidity right, it should be fine, but make sure that if you notice that your animal is shedding, that you do check those toes. And if the shed is stuck on there, consider giving them a moist hide or giving them a bath. Let them soak in a container with about this much water in it and maybe a towel on one side so they can get some of that shed off. If you are still having problems, there is a product that I really like to use, and I'll put it right here, that helps so much with getting that stuck shed off. You can spray it directly on them, but I like to put a few drops into the water when I give them a bath. It's just a bunch of reptile safe oils and stuff that helps get that skin off. We're also going to really quickly touch on brumation. I did a whole video here about bearded dragon brumation, and the concept is basically the same with blue-tongued skinks. It's getting cold and reptiles tend to slow down in the wintertime, and sometimes blue-tongued skinks brumate. Not all are going to brumate, but some will. They're going to stop eating, they're going to stop basking, and they might just burrow and hide for a couple weeks or a couple months. If you notice that your animal's starting to slow down in the winter, I would definitely take a fecal sample into my vet to make sure that they do not have parasites, because brumation symptoms and parasite symptoms are the same, and we don't want to assume that an animal is brumating and really have parasites and it be suffering. We want to make sure that they actually are going into brumation, and once we have confirmed that they are going into brumation, you can just kind of leave them alone and stop feeding them, not worry about them. You can leave the lights on, you can turn the lights off, you can do whatever you want. Again, I made a much more detailed video on this last week, so definitely check that out if you are interested, but just keep that in mind that that might be something that you have to deal with blue-tongued skinks. If you've made it this far in the video and you don't have a blue-tongued skink yet and you're wondering where to get one, reptile shows almost always have blue-tongued skinks. However, almost all of those Indonesian, Irian Jaya, blue-tongued skinks are wild caught. No matter what your opinion of wild caught animals are, if you do get a wild caught animal, you need to take it to the vet to be tested for parasites, because most likely that animal has parasites and will need to be treated. Blue-tongued skinks are expensive. Morty was $350, I don't even remember now, but he was expensive. So if you go to a reptile show and they are selling blue-tongued skinks for $100, know that it is most likely a wild caught animal, and you will have to, on top of that $100, pay vet bills for that animal, which could easily be another $100, $200 after medication and the initial visit and all of that. You can also find reputable breeders in a lot of different places. Facebook is always wonderful for this. The forums that I'm going to link below have quite a few breeders that frequent those forums. There are a lot of options, but honestly, Facebook is probably going to be the easiest, because it's going to allow you to find breeders that are in your area so that you can go and look at those animals and pick those animals up. If you have a local pet store that you trust, ask them if they know of any local breeders, because a lot of times those local pet stores will communicate with local breeders, especially if those people frequent reptile shows. They usually know where to get things. But if you are going for a northern blue-tongued skink, which was not the subject of this video at all, but if that is something that you are going to do, northern blue-tongued skinks here in America are all captive bred. Make sure that no matter where you are getting your animal from, though, you do ask them if they are wild caught or captive bred. Most of the time, even if a vendor at a reptile show is selling wild caught animals, if you ask them, they will tell you that they are wild caught, or they will say that they are field collected, which is the same as wild caught. So make sure to keep that in mind as well. So as I talked about in the feeding section of this video, you can feed things like dubia roaches, and this video is sponsored by thedubiadoo.com. Thedubiadoo.com is such a wonderful source of dubia roaches that you can have delivered directly to your house. The Dubiadoo's dubia roaches are all organically fed. He does his best to reduce, reuse, and recycle to help the environment, and you get the roaches delivered directly to your house. What's more convenient than that? He also has a super easy to navigate website that is as easy as clicking a couple of buttons and having dubia roaches on their way. Make sure to use my code L at thedubiadoo.com to save 10% off of your entire order. Thank you so much to the Dubiadoo for sponsoring this video. But that is all I have for you guys this week. I am in no way an expert at blue-tongued skinks. Morty is my first blue-tongued skink, but I've had a lot of requests to do this video ever since I very first posted the video of me setting up his first setup ever when he was a little bitty baby. So I decided to finally go ahead and do that, because I've had him for almost a year now, and I just wanted to get that out to you guys. If you are getting a blue-tongued skink, again, please do research. That's not just me. Please make sure you are reading articles and listening to other sources that you trust. Ask questions to the breeder, whatever you have to do to make sure that you are able to provide the best care that you possibly can for your animal. But that's it. As always, if you have not already, please feel free to follow me on my other socials and like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications every single time I put out a video, which is every Sunday. Huge thank yous and shout outs to HTXPPP Cresties for following me on Instagram, going through and like a whole ton of stuff. Thank you so much. You are the bee's knees. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye. Pattern on their back, a thinner thicknesses of lines, since this is a burrowing species. Since this is a burrowing animal, since this is a burrowing animal that often important for them so that they hello? At that point started giving him about